Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Chinese-American rapper Jason Chu is known for his high-energy live performances that blend introspective lyricism with crowd-moving passion. On a mission to speak hope and healing in a broken world, his songs and videos tell stories of youth, family, and history. It was fascinating to learn how he blends his love for hip-hop with activism. It was also inspiring to hear about his work with the community in organizations like Hate is a Virus and the Japanese American National Museum. Jason and I have a fun origin story, which you will hear momentarily. It is a reminder of despite how large the world is, our ability to connect is unlimited. I am grateful to Jason for reaching out, and I'm excited for you to hear our conversation. As always, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Jason. Thanks so much for joining me on my podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited, honestly, because, I do interviews here and there, but we have your family and your lineage. I have a lot of honor and respect and history there. So I'm really glad to be here.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you for reaching out to me, which is such an honor. And I was so moved by your kindness and your support. And then you said you were a Wallum family member. And I was like, oh, that's it. Like, we're connected. So I'm a little afraid for you to share, but can you tell me what your experience was like and just kind of rehash my memory, because so many wonderful people come through our doors. It's like a revolving door at the temple. And I unfortunately, I have trouble remembering every single human, but I feel like you'll spark my memory.
Yeah. Okay. So the whole situation, I, studied like Long Fist and studied, but like Honga growing up in Delaware. So for me as a Chinese American kid growing in Delaware, it wasn't, my family didn't have a lot of community or whatever. And I think, and as I'm sure so many of our friends and so many of our colleagues would share, I feel like martial arts, especially growing up, at a time before K-pop or a time before, like 88 Rising, for so many young Asian Americans in a certain time period, martial arts was the most visible, cool way to get in touch with something that we didn't even know, where to get it at. So I grew up studying Kung Fu. And I remember my family was planning a vacation to Orlando and was like, oh, we're going to do the Disney thing. We're going to do the Universal thing. And I was doing research on Google and I was like, yo, there's this Kung Fu temple in Florida. And, they've got this lineage and the Grandmaster Pui Chan seems like super cool. And oh my gosh, Mimi Chan, Sifu Mimi, was Mulan, was the motion capture reference. And my sister and I love that movie. So we wound up going down for a summer vacation. My parents and sister went to the theme parks and they did all that stuff. And they dropped me off at the temple. And I stayed there. It must have been about month and a half because we had a timeshare. So they were doing just like a little summer vacation. Wow. And I was living across the road from the temple in that, little house, that little dorm.
Yes, and we had the dorm. What year was this?
My gosh, this must have been like
90s?
Early 2000s.
Early 2000s. Okay, because we don't have that building anymore. It's a Wawa now.
which more Wawas in the world. I'm always a fan of it. But yeah, no, this must have been early 2000s. I was very young. Wow. And so so for several weeks, I was living there across the road from the temple. And every morning I wake up, eat a little breakfast, walk over, train with, I remember there was one Sihing or one Sifu, like sort of a shorter Chinese dude. Yes. Yeah. So Sifu 2 was, God bless him.
He's still there.
Ah,
And patient as ever, patient and kind as ever. He's the nice Sifu, and I'm the other one.
no, because y'all was scary because I was like, man, these are like superstars. These people are doing such dope things, and Sifu 2 is so kind, and so every morning training, home for lunch, back over
Yeah.
training, and then evening classes with the other students. And
Yes.
and so I was there, and that was really formative. All I did was read manga in the dorm, and and train all day, and that really, honestly, like it was like a dream experience. You know what I'm saying? Like it
Yeah. Yeah.
was, and I'll be real also, of course I trained a little bit back up in Delaware, but then
Mhm.
training with y'all on the praying mantis style, talking about a lot of things that I know you and I are passionate about now,
Yeah.
identity, community. I
Mhm.
think that was, one of the first times that I saw just a lot of really dope Asian people around me running some shit, like doing cool stuff, being really like not worrying about the outside world or the mainstream world, but just building something. And looking at it now, I see the entrepreneurship, and I see the work that went into building and maintaining that institution.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you. That is so kind. And I'm so grateful that you don't have some horror story about Sifu Mimi because many of my students that have come through are like, oh boy, I'm always waiting for the one. But I love that. You are probably one of the last ones to stay at that dormitory because honestly, yeah, it wasn't many a family that would drop their kid off at the temple and just like go to Disney and leave their kid for a few weeks to train at a kung fu temple. And, in the 80s, there was a lot of people soul searching that would come
Hmm.
and live at the kung fu temple. But that's not really kind of a modern day now, I think what people do, right? I mean, maybe if we had it
Yeah.
available still, they would, who knows? But I think you were really one of the last ones. So that is so wild. I love that. That is amazing. So, so excited that you reached out. And I love that we're able to kind of share this history and this story. And I really loved finding out about you and the work you're doing and then our connectivity and of course
Hmm.
your work on Warrior, and then I've been just privileged to be able to talk to so many wonderful Warrior cast members and crew and just so I mean it's all coming full circle. We were bound to meet again.
Yes. Yeah, no, and that was the really dope thing was, so we actually, my sister and I, we went back to Orlando on a family trip, the first family trip we'd had in like a decade,
Okay.
with her and her fiance, my parents and me. And so we were in Orlando again. And if I'd known at the time, but so we were in Orlando over the
Yeah.
Thanksgiving holiday. And afterward, we were messaging, and she's like, yo, you remember back that one trip we had where you stayed at while I was like, oh, heck yeah. And so that's when I went down the Google wormhole and I was like, oh, is it still
Ah,
there? And I was like,
yes.
oh, I wonder. And I'm going to be real. I'm going to be real. But I looked you up with some apprehension because you know what it is, like beloved figures, respected figures from your childhood
Yes.
don't always age into the leaders that you hope they would. You know what I'm saying? So I was like, yo, what's the Sifu up to? And I looked and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great because you've been so vocal about things that matter, about justice things, about, I think personally, Kung Fu's always been about, from its historical roots, it's always been about fighting for those who are on the other side of power. Right.
Mhm.
And so to see you speaking out on Black Lives Matter, to see you, leading so much in Stop AAPI Hate, to see the things that you're talking about, I was so stoked. I messaged my sister. I was like, yo, Sifu Mimi is like actually a really dope like community leader. This is so cool. So and then I noticed that we had some mutual friends from Warrior,
Yes,
and I was
yes,
like,
yes.
yo, okay, this is great.
Well, I'm so relieved. So thank you for that. But you're right. Like historically, kung fu and the principles that my father taught me anyway. And I don't know about. I can't speak to other styles and family systems
Hmm.
or anything like that. But for sure, it's always to protect those who cannot, protect themselves, to stand up for those who cannot or don't have that voice or don't have that platform, right? And so I definitely feel really passionate about it, and I can see you do as well. And I am super psyched to talk to you about hip hop because, so child of the 80s, but hip hop of the 90s, right? My husband and I actually met and bonded in our science class over hip hop and kung fu movies,
I love it.
Throw that in there. And so, when did your love for hip hop begin? And, just tell me kind of about that passion, because that was really super cool to see that, you reached out to me and I'm like, what? This is a hip hop artist and just activist. And yeah, so tell me about your love for hip hop, because I'm there with you.
Yeah, I love, and this is something that I say actually, is that I think there's this thread in Asian American entertainment of a lot of folks have actually both of these elements in their backgrounds. They have hip hop and they have martial arts. Whether I look at somebody like our friend Perry, I look at Randall Park, he got his start as a rapper. Aquafina, Nora, rapper. Eddie Wong, hip hop culture. So for me, what it was, like I said, Chinese kid growing up in Delaware, just not looking for a community, looking for people that I could be around, something that I could feel was mine, something that could feel powerful and uplifting. And I really found so much of that in hip hop. I found so much of that, I think my whole youth, I'd always been taught that, you got to measure up to a certain standard, and so I was always, good with writing and good with words. But the only way that I knew that I was good at it, right, was a teacher would be like, oh, you get an A on this, or, oh, this essay is a good essay or whatever, because it fits the 5-paragraph essay format. And it's all about living into a box. You know what I'm saying? But then hip hop, my friend Yusef played me my first, I heard it on the radio, but he played me my first front to back album. I think it was Jay-Z, The Blueprint 2. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And at the time, I didn't know why, but looking back, I think what it was the first time that I saw a marginalized body from a marginalized community not trying to accommodate the center, but instead just relocating the center to where they are. You know what I'm saying? What I love about hip hop is it says, hey, if you don't know our culture, if you don't know our language, if you don't know our lifestyle, you got to learn. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, hey, we're going to bend over backwards to accommodate you and to fit you and to fit into your society. It said, hey, I'm just going to talk about what it was like growing up in the projects. I'm just going to talk about what it's like to be a young Black man in America, young Black woman in America, young Latino, Latina, and that I think was so cool and captivating, because as somebody who grew up, I did not in any sense feel unliked or feel, like exiled, but I definitely knew there were parts of my life and experience that were very difficult to share or to bring up in sort of mixed company. And hip hop served as a venue and as really a blueprint for how to talk about my experiences, how to talk about our families, our experiences as Asian Americans, growing up in America, born in America, in a way that I never found nowhere else. And that's really where the love for it started out.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't mind sharing a little bit about that background growing up in Delaware, because as diverse as Orlando is now, and the memory you have of it being in our world of the Wallam Temple was not really Central Florida, right? It was still kind of we were in a very special kind of niche place. So for me growing up in Orlando, it was not very diverse at the time. And so I imagine for a lot of that was the same for you where you were. And like you said, you maybe didn't feel like you were getting, discriminated against every day or downtrodden, but you definitely didn't feel like you had that sense of belonging. And so, I mean, maybe you could share a little bit about what that childhood was like. And then, some of those examples of, because I really feel like part of the reason I do this podcast is to kind of share a lot of these stories so people can really understand and empathize. Like, we are real people and people have said these things to us and these things actually happen. And it's fascinating that so many people don't realize it, that this is literally a part of every single person. Any BIPOC community member I've ever spoken to has a story to share, and I'd love to hear your story and kind of how, all of that kind of came together and what that childhood was like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think so my family's experience, right? Every family is different and unique, even as much as we're part of larger systems than ourselves, right? So my family, my parents are both Chinese, but they were born in Southeast Asia. So my mom was born in Malaysia and my dad was born in Thailand.
Okay.
And they both actually grew up going to international schools, going to like Anglican schools or international English schools. So they came to the States for college, already speaking English.
Right.
And so growing up, it was very interesting because my parents speak, English without an accent. They understand a lot about American culture, but at the same time, definitely racially and then even culturally, racially in terms of what people see us as, what people assume about us, culturally in terms of, just how we move, what we consider normal. Definitely, exactly, traditions, very Asian in some ways. So I think for me growing up, it was this very interesting blend of, my family doesn't have the accent thing. I never had to translate for my parents. I know that's a big thing for a lot of Asian American youth is that, if their parents are first generation, it's often the children that do help with the business or the bills or, hey, somebody's knocking at the door. I've got to answer the door. That was never me. But what there was this almost false sense of normalcy where, growing up, like I could watch, I could read a Harry Potter or I could watch a Star Wars and I could be like, yeah, I'm Harry Potter. Yeah, I'm Luke Skywalker. I grew up and grateful to my parents for, letting me have this normativity to where I'm like, yeah, I could be the hero of the story. But then there was, I say it's a false sense of security almost because the older I got or, I think for many of us BIPOC folks, you have those interactions, the microaggressive interactions that, people don't intend to be mean. They don't intend to be racist, but little things like, for example, I remember at our church, one day we went to this, white church, and one day there was another Asian family visiting. And then, one of the leaders at the church, white dude, asked me like, oh, are those your family members? And I was like, nah, these are just some people that I guess were also here. And he was like, oh, I saw them and your parents greeting each other, and I thought maybe those are his like grandparents. And I was like, no, like these are just another people. You know what I'm saying? And like, if you saw two white people greeting each other, you would never think like, oh, that must be his auntie. So things like that, or things like definitely one thing that I didn't realize so much was like, I was always high achieving. I always did well in school. But then, there were these expectations, right? Of like, oh, because you're Asian, you're going to do well. And I think that I had a lot of mental health issues during my teenage years because I lived into those stereotypes. And I'm not ashamed of that, but there was so much pressure, I think, placed on me from teachers or from, administrators at school or whatever, who were saying like, oh, you're the one to do this, or, hey, we've got this competition, you should do it. And I think for a lot of my life until recently, and I've worked through this with therapy and counseling, I felt a lot of pressure on my back to achieve, like I was saying, to live up to someone's standard for me. Yeah. And just because those standards, if the standards are set low and the expectation is, oh, you won't amount to shit, that damages people. Absolutely. But also if the standards is set super high and the expectation is, oh, you're always going to get straight A's, you're always going to bring back gold medals, you're always going to do whatever, that brings a kind of mental unhealth and a mental strain in a different way. So, and then of course there were random little encounters, like, comments here and there. Like I remember one time I was hanging out with a Chinese American girlfriend of mine, and we were just at the park. And I remember some kids like threw rocks. And now I don't know, like they were just some like, teenage, whatever, like, but you never know. And I think that was part of what I'm talking about is that, I didn't like, did they just want to fuck around? Did they just want to be weirdos? Right. Or was it racially motivated? Yeah. And that was always something that was coming up is this just a regular interaction, or is this because I'm Chinese? Is this because I'm Asian? You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, clearly that doesn't change. That hasn't changed, right? Clearly that like perpetuates today and what we've kind of seen and what you and I've been speaking about so much publicly in regards to everything with the pandemic. But, speaking about like that upbringing and that pressure. I don't have the statistics. I wish I did. I'd be a much better podcaster if I had it all. But I think there is a high rate of like suicide and mental health issues amongst Asian Americans, especially when they get into collegiate years and everything. And then there's all of this pressure. And I want to discuss, since you're so open about it. And I've also been an advocate for mental health. I'm all about therapy, and I'm all about addressing mental health and knowing that it is something that needs to be it needs to be out there and it needs to be discussed, especially amongst our community, because it is frowned upon to say you want to go to therapy or may need therapy. And it's a stigma in the Asian community. And I really want that to change. And I have noticed that change, I will say, with people like you who are speaking out. And I know even with my students feeling more comfortable, this next generation, they're like, oh, my therapist. And I could never imagine at 19 being able to say that out loud in front of people, I mean, and I just hope that because we normalize it and talk about how beneficial, it's just like saying I went to get a massage or a spa treatment or a pedicure or whatever I need to help me, right? To help me heal. And so I've noticed that effect for that next generation. But like, I think you are definitely younger than I am, but I feel like even so, was there a lot of pressure even amongst your parents being as in tune with the American culture? Was that difficult to talk about mental health, and was that difficult to kind of ask for that help and things like that, and at what age and everything? Or was it like very difficult in your household as well? Was it kind of like, no, we don't talk about those things?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I will say, like, for me and my family, they actually were the ones who put me in counseling when I was in. Honestly, the older I get, the more I'm like, yo, y'all are some outliers,
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, they were the ones, they saw me struggling in high school. They were like, yo, we don't know how to handle this. So I guess, maybe like some therapy, some psychology could help him out. And it did and it didn't, but I will say this, though. I will say that I think in many ways, the two things, the first thing is what I've realized is that race aware or trauma informed therapy is so crucial, right? Because we have so many. So I have a lot of friends. The grad school I went to has a school of psychology. And so I have a lot of friends who are marriage and family therapists, or they have a PsyD. And one thing I've learned so much talking to them is that if counselors aren't trained to understand racialization and the way it works, aren't trained to understand gender or different gender identities and the way they work, they can actually completely skip over things, right? Because I personally, I think I've felt this at times, and I have so many friends who say, hey, I go to therapy, and they are ascribing things to certain causes that I'm like, no, I actually really think it has a lot to do with, microaggression, microaggressive load, allostatic load, the emotional wear and tear that builds up on a person of color. But if the therapist isn't trained to see that as a vector for stress and a vector for depression and a vector for mental strain, then a lot of things can be overlooked. And the other thing also, because a big thing for me and a big thing for, some of my friends is talking about the ways that we view and look at Asian parents and communities. I think that there's a lot about this country that pathologizes the ways that our parents treat us, and they say, Asian cultures don't believe in mental health. And I actually completely disagree with that. I think,
right.
You look at Zen Buddhism, you look at Taoism, you look at, Hinduism, those are way more mentally healthy, spiritually holistic systems than a lot of what exists in the West. But I think that so much of what we see, it's kind of like we never see our parents before, we always see our parents as they are in America, trying to navigate a new system, trying to figure out like, a lot of, right, one stereotype is like, oh, Asians don't complain a lot. And we don't complain a lot because so many of our parents saw what it was like in the 70s and 80s for people of color who complained. You know what I'm saying? It didn't go good. Right. So I say all of that, not to say that, oh, no, our parents are perfect and blameless. But I say that to say, like, especially for a lot of, I think, Asian Americans, we've got to start opening up the conversation and humanize our parents, kind of to be like, yo, maybe the reason my parents didn't do certain things wasn't because they didn't care about me or they were just ignorant, but maybe they had reasons. They had financial reasons. They had cultural, political reasons, for being wary of certain things that we now, because we know how to navigate the American system better, because we know a little bit more about, how therapy works, how reporting works. Oh, if I talk to this therapist and I say this thing, they're legally bound not to disclose it. Just being aware of that, I think, makes therapy so much of a safer place than for a lot of our, first generation Asian American parents who aren't aware of that. And they're just like, wait, you're going to go and tell this white lady everything. and I don't know what you're going to say. So cool up. Right. Yeah, anyway, you get my point. And I don't say that to dismiss anything, but
of course,
to complicate the conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, speaking of that whole dynamic, right, and how that kind of ties into you as a hip hop artist and that in itself, right? How do you break down that Asian American stereotype of, wait, you're Asian American. How can you be a hip hop artist? Like, to me, like you said, you're watching TV and you're like, I could be Harry Potter and I could be Luke Skywalker. and we, transcend those barriers. But clearly to the general public, there's a barrier there, right? And it's kind of like, oh, wow, he's an Asian hip hop artist. I'm like, no, he's just a hip hop artist, right? And
thank you.
But right, there's also, and we talked about the martial arts and the hip hop and how they're so intertwined. And in the same regard, hip hop artists love martial arts. I mean,
oh yeah,
we got Wu-Tang Clan, we got like all these, but there's so much connectivity there. And there's always a discussion. And I've had a lot of discussion with other hip hop artists and creators about cultural appropriation and like where did those lines, blur and what that kind of means. And so I'd love to get your take on being a hip hop artist, being Asian American as a hip hop artist, and then also like how you kind of, approach that if people kind of come at you with that, well, this is cultural appropriation kind of discussion.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's such we could have a whole masterclass together on this one. Right?
We can do part two. We're not limited to one podcast here.
Hey, can we just start a podcast? Sifu, maybe can we just?
If you produce it and do the tech stuff, sure. I'm happy to talk anytime.
Oh yeah. So. Man, so many thoughts. The first thought, right, is I look at, Bruce Lee and how really literally it was him teaching a black man, right? Jim Kelly, right? It was him teaching a black man Kung Fu that was so radical in the community, right? Of course, he had his confidence. He had so much. But when he came to America, he said, like, look, Chinese Kung Fu is for the world. We're not gonna get up by holding this secret to ourselves, but this is for anybody who needs it. Mm-hmm. And I think also about there's this scholar, this post-colonial scholar, Vijay Prashad, and Vijay Prashad talks about how polyculturalism is the way to view interaction between communities, not neoliberal multiculturalism, right? And the difference is multiculturalism is like, yo, yeah, black is beautiful and Asian is beautiful and it's great to be Latinx and native and white and we're all, the salad bowl, right? We all bring our ingredients and toss it in. The problem with that, Prashad says, though, is that it's not actually true to how socialization works. You know, it's all well and good to say like, yo, man, we've got a beautiful, diverse neighborhood. There's Chinese people and Japanese people and Black people and Africans. But the kids that grow up in those neighborhoods aren't going to be like, oh, I'm Chinese, so this is my culture, and you're Black, so that's your culture, right? The kids who grow up in those spaces are going to grow up polycultural. It's going to mix and it's going to blend. And so what Prashad kind of articulates is blending happens as a natural social psychological function of proximity. Now, what you do with the blend is where it becomes ethical or unethical, right? What he says is it's inevitable. It's a rule of nature that if two people, two cultures are side by side, they're going to start blending. Now, if one of those cultures that has more social capital takes that blend and markets and copyrights and locks down that blend and says, oh, we can profit from this and it's our copyright, so no one else gets it. That is when it becomes really unethical, right? So, for example, if I, as an Asian American dude, were to be like, oh, yo, hip hop is mine, and not just mine as in I belong to it, because it absolutely is, but hip hop is mine as in I'm the one who's going to get to market it. When the contracts come in, that money goes to me. When the visibility comes in, that goes to me. That's when it becomes unethical. But the flip side of it is, you know, and this is something that I've worked very hard at in my career, is when you get a platform to platform other voices, right? To platform people who taught you, platform people who trailblazed, you know, and that's why anytime I'm on stage, anytime that, you know, we got a project coming out, I try to include as many voices as possible, my mentors, my friends, people from the community, different people than me, not just East Asian dudes. And that to me is where the line gets drawn. My friend Andrew Chow, who co-founded Boba Guys, he said something really cool one time. He said, you know, it's not just the response to appropriation isn't just appreciation, but it's attribution. He said, you know, like he said, like, hey, look, I don't care who makes boba. That's great. You know, like that's what we want. We want more people to be like, yo, boba is like just a nice snack to drink. Mm-hmm. But we want you to attribute it to where it comes from, right? Don't be like, yo, 7-Eleven has boba. This is the new best thing. We made this. Be like, hey, you know, this is a Taiwanese snack that originated in Asia, and now we're putting our spin on it. And if you can just do that little showing honor, showing homage, showing lineage, showing tradition, that goes a long way towards then people who love it, instead of being like, yo, I love boba, let me go to 7-Eleven. You know, if they're in a new city, they might be like, yo, I love boba, let me go to Chinatown. And that can make all the difference financially, publicly, in terms of perception of where cultures come from.
Yeah, great. I love it. You're schooling me on some new words and theories. I love it. Thank you so much. I always say, like, one of the things is this podcast for me is totally selfish. One, I get to just talk to people that I want to talk to. That's super interesting, and I'm the one that gets to learn. So it's completely to my benefit. So I have to ask. So your music is so positive, which I love. I mean, the message that you are putting out there, and, you know, just so much about family, like you said, and history in your music and your background and the activism and everything. Has that always kind of been what you wanted to do when you thought about, you know, being an artist and creating? Was that always a theme? Has that become more prevalent in the last couple of years because of the landscape of politics and what we've been through, or has this kind of like always been like kind of in your heart?
Yeah, you know, the dope thing is it kind of has that. It's not a response to, you know, COVID era anti-Asian racism. It's not a response to what I see around me. So what it was, you know, like I said, in high school, you know, grew up rapping, grew up just like hanging out with friends, listening to hip hop. And I'm the kind of person, and I think you are too, right? The kind of person who, if I love something, I don't just want to consume it. I want to create it too. Like to me, that's one of the highest forms of love for something, is if you want to add to it, you know? And so I always loved doing rap music, and at the same time, I was digging into Asian American studies, digging into justice work, digging into community work, but they were all kind of separate. And I remember I was driving around New Haven, Connecticut with my boy Lucas one time, and Lucas was like, yo, man, he's also a musician. He was like, yo, if you, why do you never rap about this stuff you're learning about? Why do you never rap about this stuff you're studying and researching? And I was like, yo, I see them as kind of like, for me, rap is just something to blow off steam. And this was when I was a lot younger. And he was like, yo, man, I think if you actually just started rapping about the things that you're deeply passionate about, it could do something. And so I did, a while ago. That was a very formative conversation. I started actually just putting, because, at the time I was like, man, I've never heard no raps about like, Asian American history. I've never heard no raps about like, post-colonial theory. I've never heard no raps about like,
I haven't either.
Word. And I was like, wow, this does feel natural and this does feel right. And then when I started bringing that to the table, so honestly, I've got a college degree. I can always work in whatever. I could always go get a graduate degree and make a fine living. So for me, it was never like, yo, I got to do music. It was like professionally, it was like, hey, music is something I love and I'm passionate about. But then I started seeing the engagement. I started seeing that when I would put a video on YouTube, it would get some hits, or when I would perform live, people would resonate with it. And I was working in 501c3 nonprofit community work at the time. And I was, and the sort of spark that went off was I realized that everybody I wanted to reach in my nonprofit life was at these shows, and like, we would work so hard. Nonprofits spend so much money to get people in the doors.
Yeah.
And I was at a point in my artistic journey where people were starting to pay me to perform, do a college show, do a little community show, make a couple $100. And I was like, man, how different is it in the nonprofit world? We're spending money on campaigns just to get people aware of the services we offer, versus here, they're paying me money because they want to hear this. They want the music. They want the message. And so that was when I said, you know what, I'm going to make a run at this music thing professionally, if I can do it in a way that is consonant with my values and that promotes the social impact I really want to see. Because if it doesn't, who cares, man? I can make a living and I can make music and be perfectly happy and fine. But there's an opportunity here to actually touch the world, to actually come into this community that we're a part of. Yeah. And so I moved to LA to do music. And my mission statement has always been speaking hope and healing in a broken world, and really trying to give that to any audience I interact with. And so that's been my sort of guiding message my whole career. And then it so happened in the last couple of years, people are really, even like 3-4 years ago, I was very, very, very marginal. It was like, oh man, this guy's doing this nice stuff. He's cool, but it's not really mainstream. And then the conversation, I remember February 2020, Chinatown started losing business. I can't only imagine what the Walam Temple and what your family, the different things, the emails you get, the phone, all of this terrible harassment. And the interesting thing was that my career had worked out to where I was established as a voice of someone who's talking about these things from a thoughtful, hopeful, aware lens. And that's how it brings us to today.
Yeah. And I'd love for you to share with listeners as well some of the things you're up to and all the amazing things you're doing with the Japanese American National Museum and all the really amazing things that are bringing to the forefront and like kind of coming full circle with all of the groundwork you did, leading up to the really amazing visibility you're having, but also the impact that you're making.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's been so much great community work going on recently. And what I want to say first off is that there always has been, whether it's advancing justice, whether it's the Japanese American Citizens League, our friends at OCA, Asian American Advocates, whether y'all listening, tuning in, know it or not, for 170 years, there's been Asian American activists and community organizers and academics and politicians fighting. Now, what I think is really powerful recently is that there's become this visibility, right? For the first time, really the most prominent time in our lives, Asian Americans, Chinese Americans are seen as having a stake on the battlefield. And so, I've been very privileged. I'm the communications director at Hate is a Virus. Hate is a Virus is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that some friends founded in March 2020, right as COVID was starting to take off, because we were seeing the anti-Asian racism, whether that was financial boycotts of Chinatowns, whether that was physical violence, whether that was, more hatred, more slurs, things like that. So I'm communications director at Hate is a Virus. And the really dope thing is, over the last year and a half, we raised $1 million to go into grants that support Asian American community work. So, in the wake of the terrible Atlanta shootings, we were able to send some monies to grassroots organizations on the ground, right? When there was a mass shooting of Sikh Americans, we were able to send some funds into the Sikh community to assist in, just, I don't even want to say recovering, but just helping to cushion and helping to heal and helping people not to feel like there's no resources for them. So Hate is a Virus is an org I've been super proud to work with. I'm also, for 2022, the Mellon Foundation funded the Japanese American National Museum to have 2 artists in residence to create anti-racist Asian American work. And so our friend Audrey Chan, an incredible muralist, is one of the artists in residence, and I'm the other one. So actually, literally tonight, my creative director is flying in, and we've got a writing camp this weekend. And we're starting work on the next set of EPs and songs that, hopefully we'll be able to speak into kind of this communal experience, into this moment, but also into just sort of everything that goes on around us. And the last piece that I'd really love to highlight is, this is really interesting. And it's erased from so many textbooks. In 1871, California's largest recorded public lynching happened in Chinatown in Los Angeles. 19 or 20 Chinese American men, including very young boys, were killed when a mob of about 500 Angelenos just rampaged through Chinatown, driven by anti-Chinese xenophobia and bigotry. It's exactly what we see now. Oh, they're taking our jobs. They're taking our money. They don't belong here. Chinatowns are dirty, all of that. And so for about 150 years, this history was sort of silent. And then last year, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti said, hey, we need to uncover some of the difficult parts of LA's past, and commissioned a civic memory report. And one of the things that commission highlighted was the 1871 Chinatown massacre. So I'm actually on part of the steering committee to help Los Angeles within the next few years is going to get a memorial commemorating finally the victims of this massacre and the downsides of that history of our existence here. And this is the kind of work that makes me super proud, because, it's literally things, the generations that came before us, we might not be related to them in blood, but as Asian Americans, these are our ancestors. These were, the Chinese American boys who grew up playing in the streets in LA. These are their stories. And I'm so proud that, you know, now we stand at a point where we have platforms and we have influence and we have voices that can help make sure that those who came before us aren't forgotten.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, we've been kind of in communication about all of that and how important Asian American AAPI history is, because it is American history, and for, you know, all of the obvious reasons, but just the benefits of us learning more about our history. And it's something that I've been very, you know, frustrated and embarrassed about, that it's not something I knew enough about. You know, wasn't in our schools. This is why we're working on the bills here. I know in California, you've got stuff going on and we're fighting hard. It's going to be a struggle here in Florida. I'm not going to lie, but we will continue that fight. And I had the pleasure of speaking with Stuart Kuo of the Asian American Education Project. And I said, you know, how come it's taken this long, right, to have all these states finally going, hey, why is this omitted? You know, it is part of history. Why is it omitted? And he just said simply, you know, because there wasn't enough people to fight for it and there wasn't people to advocate. And so people like yourself and just getting out there and educating us and having these memorials and bringing that awareness is so important, because it is an integral part of our history, and not just as Asian Americans, but as Americans. And I think, you know, it's really exciting to kind of see like this time. And it's, if there's one thing that can come out of this horrible pandemic and the negativity for, you know, all the anti-Asian hate, is that now there's a visibility, like you said, and people are really tired of being silenced. And I think that's been the positivity, and finding one another, right? Like, because of all of this too, like this is where we make connections and then we learn more, and then we're, you know, it just keeps perpetuating, because that energy is contagious, right? So the more people you meet and you're like, wow, you're doing this too, and this has come up, and you know, now you're totally on my radar. So if there's there's a need for anything poetic or spoken word or hip hop, I'm you're my phone call. So
please.
I wanted to also congratulate you on the fun things too that are just like exciting, like Warrior and Woo Assassins and Tetris, because I totally loved Tetris growing up. Not gonna lie, who doesn't? Talk to me about how exciting that part of it is. I mean, because yes, it's definitely important to do super meaningful and activism work, but also it's great to also be part of these creative projects as well.
Yeah. So as you said, I got, actually, there's a couple songs on the newest version of Tetris Beat, which is out on Apple Arcade now. If you don't have an iOS device, unfortunately, you know, it's locked off from you. But yeah, Tetris Beat on Apple Arcade. My song Get Set, produced by actually legendary Asian American hip hop producer Chops from the Mountain Brothers. You know, our sync agency reached out and said, hey, we've got this opportunity. This new video game is looking for music. And it was cool because my sync agency said specifically, they want diverse music. You know, they don't just, they're actually looking for, you know, creators from different perspectives, from different cultures. And I was like, that's amazing. So we wrote, you know, in like 3-4 days, we wrote and submitted like 7, 8, maybe 10 songs.
Wow. And
so my group Night Market has a song on the soundtrack. I've got a song on the soundtrack. And then our friend Catherine Ho, who sang Yellow on the Crazy Rich Asians soundtrack. Nice. She and I co-wrote a song that also is in the game. And it's like a rhythm version of Tetris. So I think you get like extra points if you drop the piece dropping it. Oh, wow. On the beat. Yeah, it's kind of neat. So yeah, just, I'm stoked. Like, you know, I never ever thought growing up playing Tetris, I'd play it. Honestly, I'd play it on my TI-83 graphing calculator.
Oh, I love it.
Was where I went. That was where, because I didn't have no Game Boy. My parents weren't paying $100 for no Game Boy, but they pay $100 for a graphing calculator.
Of course, that's for school.
So yeah, you know, of course, growing up, loving video games when I could play them, loving hip hop, have a rap song of mine on a Tetris soundtrack, I'm just so grateful. I'm just so grateful that things that I never even thought to ask for come my way because I just kept my head down and kept working, I think.
100%. And I know we're running out of time here. And like you said, we're going to have to podcast again, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your creative process. Because you just said that you wrote out 7 or 8 songs in a few days. And you know, I know that was a deadline thing, but you know, what is your creative process like? Do you kind of write on your own? Do you always like collaboration? I'm always interested in the technical aspects.
Yeah. Usually, you know, I write on my own. I'll co-write. It's all, you know, who's in the studio that day. But a lot of it these days is I got some incredible producers. Shout outs to Larry, West One, and Macro Hard, and Mio Soul, and KP and Koei. Like, got some incredible friends who make dope music. So I've always got beats sitting around for whatever mood I'm in. So I'll just sit down, I'll put it on, and I'll just try to hear what the music's telling me. You know, like at this point, you know, sometimes I'll have something I know I want to speak on, and then I'll listen through music until I find one that kind of hits that same emotional space. But if I'm just going in, I'll just sit, I'll listen, and then, you know, it's art. It's not science. You know what I'm saying? There's not a protocol of like, oh, I do this and then I do that. It's really kind of, hey, how am I feeling today? You know, what do I want to talk on? Am I feeling cool and confident? Am I feeling like thoughtful? Am I like really troubled about one particular issue? And then, you know, what I'll do first usually actually is I'll come up with a title, because the title kind of dictates where everything goes, right? It dictates what the hook is going to be. It dictates what I'm going to talk on. And so if I can hear a beat and be like, yo, this feels like this to me, then that's usually where everything else comes from.
Nice. And final question is, it's really more, I guess it's really general. And I think a lot of people get asked this as hip hop artists, but because it's such a personal thing, but like, what does hip hop mean to you?
Hip hop to me, it means knowing who you are, which means knowing where you come from and standing in that truth. You know, like really knowing. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, I love that. And like I said, you're going to have to come back and talk to me again, because I think it's just so fascinating. One is our origin story, but also I want to get schooled again on more theory and more.
I'll come back if next time you let me ask you more questions, because there's so much about you and your journey and being Mulan, and you know, like I would love to come back if I can ask you some questions.
Oh, I see. You want to be the interviewer.
I just got some curiosities.
All right, we will make that happen for sure. And I know you've got to run. You have another interview after this, busy guy. But congratulations, Jason, on all of the amazing work you're doing and the meaningful work you're doing. Thank you for the meaningful work you're doing, but also, you know, just a big congratulations. And it's super, super cool to see the success you're having professionally, but artistically and creatively, and keep at it and keep being inspiring. It's really great to get to know you, and I know we will be talking again soon.
Right back at you, all of that.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.